College is where you go for a higher education, to learn new things, to challenge and be challenged, to exercise free speech. Heck, it's a constitutional right. But on campuses today, there's growing concern that speech too often goes too far. Here in Orange County, as elsewhere, college speakers have been heckled and stopped. Some boisterous students have been punished, while others have demanded safe spaces and separate housing. Where should we draw the lines? Two of Orange County's leading educators are here to discuss and debate right now on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
All your life, people talk about what's best for you. But to most people, it's just that. Talk. Unless you're with Memorial Care, a healthcare system devoted to one important thing: what's best for you.
Hi, I'm Rick Reiff, and I'm here to discuss free speech with Doctors Daniele, Struppa, and Manuel Gomez. So, thank you, both of you, for coming. And let me say, I mean, it's an honor to have two of the treasures of Orange County on this show. You're both noted academics, one a poet, the other a mathematician. So you're both involved in the music of the mind in different ways. It's great to have you here. Let's talk about you, Dr. Struppa. And by the way, I know you'd rather I call you Manuel and Daniele, but if I slip and call you doctor, please accept that you're both PhDs. Dr. Struppa, you are Italian, born in Milan. Went to the University of Milan, and then you came to the United States, got a doctorate in math at the University of Maryland, then to George Mason, where you chaired the math department. You were a college dean. On the Chapman in 2006 as provost, the #2 position at the university, and you became #1, the president, in 2016. You're an internationally honored scholar. Your research is in quantum physics and things like that. I'll read just one of the dozens of articles and book titles that you have to your name. I thought this was interesting. It's pretty I think pretty reflective. Bicomplex holomorphic functions. Okay, I don't, and that'd be a whole nother show.
We should have shown that. Yes.
Dr. Gomez, you are a poet. You're much more. You're an educator, administrator, author, community leader, humanitarian. You attended Cal State Hayward, then UC Irvine, then USC. UCI Vice Chancellor, Student Affairs. You're now Emeritus Vice Chancellor. And when you received the prestigious UCI medal, among the tributes paid to you was one from the Dalai Lama. So that's kind of reflects your standing as a humanitarian and as a leader. And I thought, just to give folks a taste of your poetry and your work, you recently wrote something in reaction to the shootings in Las Vegas and Florida, and it begins, "America is in mourning." Could you just read an excerpt for us?
I will. Our limited faith in magic allows us only to read the fate of America in the liver of a beast ravished and slaughtered through fear, insanity, and hatred. We are all in pain, and from this divided space, we rage against ourselves and each other, struggling as we nourish our hunger for real justice, only to encounter more fear and intolerance.
Yeah, thank you. And I think those emotions, to a great extent, fuel much of this debate that's going on today in our society and on college campuses. So, Dr. Struppa, let's start with you. Is free speech under assault?
Well, first let me make a comment. You said in the introduction that you said about free speech is a constitutional right. Well, that's not strictly speaking true, because the First Amendment, first of all, speaks only about the Congress that should not infringe upon free speech. Then it's been interpreted as to apply to states, but certainly does not apply outside of that. So, for example, a private institution like Chapman could say, no, we're going to put our restrictions, and that would be perfectly legal and constitutional. So within that framework, I think that too many institutions are taking that path. Chapman is an exception. We have a very clear and, if you want, radical position on free speech. We support free speech 100%. And I think that there are many institutions, on the other hand, that have chosen a different path, which is the path of creating free speech zones, which to me is a contradiction, or even to create speech codes that limit the actual free speech for students and faculty.
Why shouldn't there be limits on free speech?
Well,
Let's say on a college campus.
It's a very good question. I think our founding fathers had a really remarkable intuition. They realized two things. And the first was that every government has the tendency of eventually become abusive, and therefore will take advantage of the position of power to restrict speech. That's why they said the Congress shall not infringe on free speech, because they realized, though they were just at the beginning of this great American experiment, that that's innate in human nature. When you are in position of stating the rules, you will set up the rules so that they advantage you. So I think that they realized that. The second great intuition they had is that for a really independent, free, and democratic society, free speech is fundamental. If you don't allow free speech, you stifle new ideas. And there is a price to pay. I completely agree with the fact that sometimes free speech means that we have to allow for behavior that we would never want our children to have. And I think that there is a difference there between what I would teach my children. I tell them to be sensitive. I tell them to avoid being offensive. I tell them to be supportive of others. That's what I teach them because they're my children. To have a law, though, or a policy in a university that forbids their behavior, I think would be wrong. And I think the point is that only through free speech you really allow different ideas to flourish. And even though you have to pay the price of terrible ideas to be put on the table as well.
There is no university without free speech and academic freedom. So I'm a fierce defender of free speech, including, of course, the right of individuals to express that which we fundamentally disagree. That's the essential nature of it. It is a congressional requirement that all of governments and all of the states and all public institutions fulfill the requirements of the First Amendment. That's a bit difficult to do when we have an administration attacking free press on a daily basis and confusing us with what the truth is and what the facts are. That's another matter in a sense. But with regard to the university, I think Daniele and I have a fundamental agreement on our fierce faith in its essential nature for the university culture.
Since you invoked the political aspect of this, which is something, isn't most of the, when you have speakers coming on the campus, yes, usually it's a conservative speaker who's being prevented from speaking lately because of student protests or whatever, and that universities seem somewhat resistant to having that view expressed because they see some of it as hateful or harmful.
It's important to pull back a little bit, just the frame in terms of history, and recall that in the 1965, Berkeley was ground zero for the free speech movement. The University of California, like all great universities, defends free speech with every fiber in their institutional gut. At Berkeley, it cost nearly $4 million to provide the security for Milo Yiannopoulos and Ann Coulter and those speakers, those conservative speakers that were rhetorically coming onto the campuses and spewing, in my view, intolerant hate speech from a conservative perspective, perhaps. But nevertheless, it was antagonizing the campus community, which is discussing equality, diversity, concern for people who may have been targeted by these individual speakers. The problem with regard to the crises that we might be discussing, in my view, is that it's not really a free speech crisis. It's more of an educational crisis. Each generation has to relearn the value and principles of our Constitution. Each generation has to struggle anew to define what the values and vision of our society is going to be. And to a certain extent, the defensiveness of institutions is that they also are required to protect the safety of the student campus and the students.
And
so they have a dual obligation.
Okay, Dr. Struppa, there, taking that and again going to Berkeley, for example, I think their argument was, hey, we can't control this. You know, and a lot of institutions have basically said, hey, you're bringing somebody on, safety of students, disruption to the campus, and essentially have those speakers have been prevented or have not spoken because of concerns like that. Do you think those are handled well? And if, let's say, you were in that position, what would you do if you're facing a situation where there's a speaker, there's going to be controversy, there's going to be clashes? How do you deal with that?
Well, it's very difficult to lecture other presidents because until you find yourself in that situation, you know, it's complicated. But I think that it is clear that Berkeley, for example, was caught unprepared. There is no doubt that they had not foreseen the intensity of what was going to happen. Now, to their defense, our campuses are open spaces. You can't prevent people from flowing in, and many of the protests in Berkeley were not really students, but people coming from the outside. So the question to what will we do? Well, we have plans in place. We would certainly be ready to create spaces for the speaker to walk through. You will have ways to channel, if you want, the external presence that might arrive on campus if we had some very controversial speaker. It's very hard to predict how successful you would be, but I think that I completely disagree with universities that decide not to invite speakers because they're controversial and because they might potentially lead to trouble. The history of free speech, and I'm glad that my friend mentioned the origins at Berkeley, it's fraught with significant protests. The reason why people want to, the only point for free speech is frankly to defend something that the majority may find abhorrent. There is no real need to defend free speech in a common conversation, but you need to defend it when somebody is going to come up with something that the large amount of the community would find disagreeable. And that's really what's happening here, and that's what was happening in Berkeley, frankly, when free speech movement was born. There were new ideas that needed space, and that space was not given voluntarily. It had to be taken. So
the consequence of Berkeley was, of course, a Reagan victory in a sense, because he used Berkeley as a battleground of communists, sex deviants, and hippies. And Clark Kerr, the president of the University of California, was shortly fired after that election. Clark Kerr's famous statement was, "I'm going out the same way I came in, fired with enthusiasm."
But you know, the reality, you mentioned the election of Reagan, but the point is that free speech was achieved.
Yes,
I mean,
yes, it was.
So I think that everything that happened there actually had a tremendously positive consequence, and that's something that, as a president, sometimes I worry that I see people trying to infringing it, and not always for fiery and objectionable speakers, but for much more simple things. And you know, I take issue with this idea of microaggressions that would make even very small commentaries being considered unacceptable on university campuses. I think that that's a danger when you start saying what is the limit to free speech. Right. The moment you put a limit, somebody's going to have to make those rules, and the question is who makes the rules.
Yeah, some of those concerns among students, it does seem that whereas at Berkeley in the past students were fighting for more expression, now many students are saying there's too much expression. There's expression I perceive as harmful or insulting or dangerous, and I need a safe zone. At UCI, there's now a Black Scholars Hall because African American students said they wanted a place where they could they could feel safe from some of the comments and things on campus. Morton Shapiro, president of Northwestern University, my alma mater, said that he found it understandable that black students eating in the cafeteria would not want white undergraduates to join them. We all deserve safe spaces, he wrote. He also cited a Jewish graduate's endorsement of her own safe space at Hillel House, saying she knew that when she was there, she didn't have to worry about being interrogated by non-Jews about Israeli politics and other concerns. How do you feel about that? Should we have, Dr. Struppa first, should we have these safe zones?
I'm
these
against
safe
every
houses?
form of segregation, whether it's institutionalized, like in universities set up different residence halls. I just think that this is a way to really to escape from the challenges of finding common ground, even through significant disagreement. Maybe the biggest change in culture that I've seen is that when I was a student, and I'm sure Manuel will remember probably the same for him, we were told that the university was supposed to put you out of your comfort zone. That's something that our teacher also said it. We push you outside your comfort zone. That's why you come to college. We challenge you with ideas that you disagree with. And I worried when now the idea of comfort becomes so important, the idea of safety becomes so important. Physical safety, but I wouldn't say safety from ideas. You need to be willing to be exposed to ideas you find repugnant.
Regarding safe zones and safe spaces, I disagree with Daniele's categorizing it as informal segregation or formal segregation, return to formal segregation. It's certainly not that. The segregation of the past was legally bound and was racially instituted, and they were prevented from attending the universities of this land. They were segregated into their own schools. There was never any protest that I can recall of how terrible it is to have all those black people in one school or to have all those people in that other place. This is a First Amendment protection. We have the freedom to assemble and associate with whomever we want. So, in my view, these are initial programs to try to help students and help our society integrate itself into a far more healthy way. It's not segregating or resegregating. It's actually attempting to create a true diverse community. And it requires people to have the freedom to gather by themselves.
I just want to say I disagree with your point that
I know you do.
freedom of assembly means that I have to build a dorm to allow people to assemble.
No, you don't.
So the freedom of assembly, of course, exists, and people can congregate wherever they want. But the idea that the university would build dorms for different groups, that to me is not just the freedom of assembly. It's actually a way to create a separation, which I find difficult to coexist with your idea that this is creating a more integrated society.
Nowadays with students, sometimes their college students are being ridiculed as being snowflakes.
Yeah.
How do you feel, Dr. Gomez? Are students nowadays snowflakes, and are they being coddled?
Well, I think this idea of snowflakes goes both ways. The idea of repressing of speakers has also, over time, gone both ways. So it's not just conservative speakers being stopped now. So this whole issue of hurt feelings and is really an interesting point, because it perhaps is not a free speech issue whatsoever. It's or a struggle at all. It may, in fact, be a struggle for the values and vision of our society that's going on. Irwin Shermaninsky and Howard Gilman wrote an outstanding book called Free Speech on Campus, in which they invoke an interesting...
And Howard Gilman is the Chancellor of UCI, and Irwin Shermaninsky is the former law school dean, who's now the law school dean at Berkeley.
A sad loss for Orange County, a very sad loss. But they invoke very briefly this idea of the K-12 training against bullies, cyber bullies, and all. There was a real big move in schooling to stop bullies, because it was a phenomenon that was occurring. And in their estimation, some of this opposition to these speakers is not about opposing free speech, it's about opposing their values, dissenting against what they're presenting, and wanting to create a more integrated society with gender, race, ethnicity, and so forth. And these are the targeted ideas that this series of speakers that are going around. By the way, I didn't even also talk about YAF. Most of these speakers are funded through the Young America Foundation, which this past year just raised $65 million. They fund these speakers to go to these campuses, really not out of a concern to protect free speech, in my view, but to delegitimize higher education.
Well, that's who sets the standard? Well, you could easily make similar argument on the other side. The point is that the moment you say, well, these are delegitimized because they're funded by this particular donor, well, then you're taking a position which is, to me, intellectually indefensible. Because regardless who's paying my salary, I have the right to express a point of view. And to say that they are used to delegitimize the university, or somebody used the term, the right is weaponizing free speech. Free speech has always been a weapon. It's been a weapon of those who are in the minority. And you know what? Conservatives are in minority in the university, and that's why they're using free speech. Free speech, just like the liberals were in minority in the 60s. And so I don't think people should be so concerned about the fact that free speech is an instrument of a political and cultural battle. So and we just need to be grown-ups and fight it out.
But do you have the right to bring chaos onto a campus, expenditures of $4 million for security, and not bear any of the costs?
But no, but I'm sorry, but
not bear any of the costs?
You're blaming the victim now. I want to speak and I have a conservative message and somebody comes and breaks the windows, now it's my fault? I mean, this blaming the victim is fabulous because it's exactly the kind of stuff that we always hear about.
Universities have always had the right for time, place, and manner. That's written into all of the courts and so forth. You cannot have a speaker come in and disrupt the regular business of the university, or insult somebody, keep them from going to class. So
but Manuel,
these
they're
things
not
happen.
disrupting. They're not disrupting. The
Oh yes, they are.
Uncultured, whether you like
Classes
it or
were
not.
closed.
But that's a decision. But that's not the
know.
decision of the speaker. That's a response. So you can't blame the speaker that is coming to speak on a conservative theme, and maybe it's a firebrand or whatever the terminology is. You can't blame the speaker for the disruption.
I'm not blaming them. I just think they should bear some of the cost.
Why?
Because
why should that be? That's a way to censor my speech, because you're telling me, Daniele, if you're going to talk about stuff we really dislike, we're going to burn down the house and we're going to charge you. Yeah. Well, hell no.
Well, clubs and organizations on your campus.
Dr. Gomez, I think what you're saying, though, if with your line of reasoning, then doesn't that just support what they call the heckler's veto? If you don't like somebody, you make it so difficult for them to come on campus, whether it's because you shout them down or there's threats of violence, that effectively they're stopped from speaking.
Yeah, and I'm opposed completely to the heckler's veto or any of those things. But I'm not opposed, and everyone should understand that universities have a dual obligation to protect the safety and regular business of their campus, as well as protect free speech. You can't go with a microphone or a megaphone and speak inside of a classroom and have free speech. It's disrupting the regular business of the university. And to a great extent, the decisions that are being made with regard to this recent is a skewed perspective, because if you look at the universities, and Berkeley has 40,000 students, I think there was 15 students, or now 80, the latest number, young Republicans who were responsible for inviting these speakers through the YIF and through the support. And the predominant audience, both at UCI, when I attended some of these events recently, are not students, but as you've said, participants from beyond the community. The community is an open community, so it's not outside the community.
Right.
They have a right to be on the community as well, and in the university. But in point of fact, they don't really represent the values and concerns of the students. In addition, you have to give students a little bit of a break. They are students. They're learning. They have to learn. If they have a heckler's veto, they have to have the punishment, and they have to learn to respect free speech that they disagree with. And that's one way that they're going to learn. So these processes, I don't think that there's any space in America that provides and tolerates and protects free speech more so than the universities. Anywhere, hands down. Name me another institution. Perhaps the media, but they're under attack too, aren't they?
But just to go back to my the original question, snowflakes.
I would say that I believe that the more snowflakes are the faculty than the students. I think that what happens is that the students create the snowflake frame of mind. I don't think the students, when they come to college, are snowflaked yet. And they get
they're turned into snowflakes.
They're turned into snowflakes. That would be my assessment of the situation.
We are out of time. Okay. Thank you so much for this.
That was fast.
Yes, fantastic. Yes, all right. And that's it for now. And we've got a lot more to talk about. After we sign off here, we'll take up another important issue, immigration and the American dream. So please join us for that show too. Thanks again to Drs. Daniele, Struppa, and Manuel Gomez, and to our audience. And you can watch this show and past shows at pbssocal.org or rickreiff.com. And you can also catch our shows and our post-show open mic chatter on YouTube. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Inside OC is brought to you by
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University is a proud sponsor of Inside OC and community programming.